I don't even know how to kick this off without feeling that old tightness crawling up my chest, but I guess some stories don't wait for permission, they just demand to be told, and this one's been haunting me long enough. The night everything in my life took a sharp left turn started out looking like a picture-perfect moment, the kind of scene you'd screenshot in your mind and save forever. Warm backyard lights hanging like glowing fireflies, music drifting through the air, people laughing, dancing, pretending life was simple for once. And me? I was just standing there with a cheap soda in my hand, watching my daughter, my whole world, float around in her wedding dress like she was made of light. And real quick, before I go deeper into this mess of a story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, 'cause I love seeing how far these stories travel, and if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe, it helps more than you know. Anyway, for a minute, standing there in the middle of that little slice of happiness, I really thought life was finally giving me a break. Like maybe all the storms I'd walked through had finally passed. But life, man, life is sneaky. It waits until you're relaxed, until you're smiling, until your guard is all the way down, and that's when it hits you with a reality you never asked for. And I should have known better, I really should have. Ethan, my daughter's new husband, had that type of charm that felt too polished, too rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in a mirror before stepping out. The kind of dude who shakes your hand firm but looks at you like he's scanning your weaknesses. Something in my gut never sat right around him, but I kept brushing it off, telling myself, "Relax, man, don't be that overprotective dad." I smiled, I mingled, I tried to play the role of the chill father of the bride, but every time Ethan walked by, I felt this weird static in the air, like the universe was trying to tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, pay attention." And I didn't want to. I wanted the night to be easy. I wanted my daughter to be happy. I wanted to believe that the past I'd buried, the one full of mistakes, bad decisions, and moments that tore chunks out of my pride, would just stay buried. But looking back now, I realized the signs were right in front of me. The way Ethan strutted around like he owned the place. The way his smile tightened every time someone complimented my daughter. The way he looked at me like I was some old furniture taking up space. I tried to ignore it, but deep down, something old inside me was waking up, stretching, waiting. I didn't know it yet, but that night wasn't just a wedding. It was a test. And the man I used to be, the one I spent years trying to outrun, was about to claw his way right back to the surface. I didn't even realize how fast the night was shifting until the moment it hit me, quiet at first, like the air was changing temperature. I was standing near the drink table, trying to steady myself after all the emotions that come with giving your only daughter away, when I noticed Ethan across the room, whispering something to his friends with that smirk he always wore when he thought he was untouchable. At first, I tried to ignore it, told myself I was overthinking, told myself it was her wedding day and I had no right to ruin it by letting old suspicions creep in. But then he looked at me, dead on, like he knew exactly what I was trying to convince myself of, and he tilted his head the slightest bit, the kind of gesture that says, "Yeah, old man, I see you, and I'm about to do something you won't like." And my stomach dropped so fast I swear I felt the floor tilt under me. I tried to shake it off, so I walked toward the back door, thinking maybe a little fresh air would help, maybe clearing my head would pull me back into the moment. The night breeze hit my face, cold enough to make me blink hard, and for a second I let myself breathe. But even from outside, I could hear the muffled music, the laughter, the clinking glasses. Everything that was supposed to feel joyful suddenly felt like a background track to something darker. I kept replaying Ethan's expression in my head, that smug confidence, the kind you only see on people who've never been held accountable for anything in their life. I had seen that look before on men I used to deal with, men who knew how to play innocent in public but carried trouble in their pockets like a spare key. And maybe that's what scared me most, how familiar it all felt. I'd spent years trying to build a quiet life, trying to bury the version of myself that handled problems with fists instead of words, that wasn't afraid of consequences because I didn't expect to live long enough to face them anyway. But old instincts don't die, they sleep. And as I stood there with my hands on the wooden railing, listening to the faint echo of the DJ calling for everyone's attention, I felt those instincts waking up, stretching, testing the air. Something was about to happen. I could feel it in my bones, the same way farmers know when a storm is coming even before the clouds appear. I wiped my hands on my jacket, trying to steady the shaking I didn't want to admit was there. And when I finally stepped back into the hall, something in the room felt colder, tighter, like every smile was strained and everybody was waiting for the next moment without knowing why. And right in the center of it all stood Ethan, holding a glass, tapping it lightly with a fork, ting, 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 the kind of sound that shuts down a room. And the second he opened his mouth, I knew the storm had officially arrived. The second that glass tapping stopped, the whole room went quiet in a way that didn't feel natural anymore. It felt staged, like everyone was unknowingly part of a scene they hadn't agreed to be in. Ethan stood there in the center, chest slightly puffed, chin lifted just enough to show he liked the power of that silence. I swear for a moment it felt like the lights dimmed around him, like the whole hall leaned in to hear whatever was about to come out of his mouth, and deep inside me something tightened, something old and instinctive that whispered, "Brace yourself, man." He looked around the hall like he owned it, letting the suspense drag a few seconds longer than any normal person would have dared to, and then he said, in that slick voice he always used when he wanted to sound impressive, "I want to take a moment to appreciate the man who raised my beautiful wife." People clapped politely, some smiled at me, and for a split second I let myself breathe, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd been wrong about him. But then Ethan's smile shifted, just a tiny flick at the corner, the kind of shift only someone like me would notice, someone trained by life to catch danger in micro-expressions. He continued talking, pacing slowly like he was giving some kind of dramatic speech. "You know," he said, voice louder now, "managing a farm takes a lot of work, a lot of strength. And let's be honest, not everyone stays strong forever." A few guests laughed awkwardly, thinking he was making some harmless joke, but my heart dropped straight to my stomach. I knew where this was going. My gut screamed it. He walked toward me, one hand still holding the glass, the other casually sliding into his pocket like he was completely relaxed, and he said, "Since my father-in-law has done his part, I think it's time for the younger generation to step in." The room shifted. You could feel it. People glanced at each other. Some looked down. My daughter's smile froze like she didn't understand what was happening. Ethan wasn't finished. He leaned closer, eyes cold, words sharp enough to slice through the music still faintly playing in the background. "So," he said, "I think it's time he hands over the farm. Tonight." My breath caught. The audacity in his voice wasn't just disrespect, it was a challenge. A public one. The kind designed to embarrass a man. I tried to respond calmly, shaking my head and saying, "Not now, son. We'll talk later," hoping to avoid turning this night into something ugly. But Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only the people near us could hear but loud enough for the room to sense tension. "No," he said. "We'll talk now. Give me the keys." My hands went cold. The hall felt smaller. People were staring, whispering. And in that split second, with every eye on us, I realized this wasn't about the farm. This was about control. Humiliation. Power. The kind of move men like him make when they think you're too old, too tired, too weak to fight back. And I felt something rise inside me, slow, heavy, dangerous. I knew this night was no longer a celebration. It was a line being drawn. And Ethan had no idea the kind of storm he was calling out. I could feel the heat rising in my face, not the kind that comes from anger exploding outward, but the kind that builds low and slow, like a fire crawling through dry wood. Everyone in that hall felt the shift too. Conversations died, chairs stopped moving, even the kids running around froze like they sensed something wrong. Ethan stood in front of me, chest forward, jaw tight, eyes locked on mine like he was daring me to react. For a moment I just stared at him, trying to understand how someone could pick my daughter's wedding night, my daughter's man, to pull a stunt like this. He had waited for the perfect moment, waited until the cameras were out, until the speeches were done, until everything was soft and glowing and full of emotion. He picked the moment I was supposed to feel proudest just so he could take something from me while everyone watched. And that kind of cruelty doesn't come from impulse, that comes from intention. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him he was out of line, but before I could even find the right words, he smirked and tapped his glass again, raising his voice so the entire hall could hear. "Come on," he said. "Don't make this weird. Everyone here knows you can't handle the work anymore. Let the farm go." A couple people gasped. Someone whispered, "What's he doing?" I felt my daughter's presence before I saw her. She rushed forward, eyes wide with confusion, face pale under her makeup. "Ethan, stop," she said, grabbing his arm, her voice shaking. "This isn't the time." But he yanked his arm away, brushing her off without even looking at her, and that, right there, hit me harder than his words. I'd seen that gesture before, years ago, from men who thought love was ownership and marriage was leverage. My daughter's face crumpled for half a second before she forced it still, like she was trying not to break in front of everyone. My heart twisted in a way I can't even explain. Ethan took another step closer to me, close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath, and said quietly, "Don't make me repeat myself, old man. Give me the keys." I felt every eye on me, neighbors, cousins, people who'd known me my whole life, people who respected me, people who never saw me look small. And for a split second, I felt exactly that small. But then, somewhere deep inside, something old pushed back, something that didn't bow under pressure, something that had kept me alive through years I don't talk about. I straightened my back, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "No." That one word hit him like a slap. His face twisted, not in surprise, but in fury, pure, unfiltered fury. And before I could even brace myself, he raised his hand and swung. The slap cracked through the hall so loud the music glitched for a second. My head jerked sideways, and the floor rushed toward me faster than I could react. I landed on my palms, breath knocked out of me, ears ringing. A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. Someone yelled. My daughter screamed. And as I pushed myself up, slow, shaky, humiliated, I realized something crystal clear. This moment wasn't the breaking point. It was the beginning. When I got back on my feet, the world felt tilted, like the room itself was ashamed of what had just happened. I could feel 200 eyes burning into my back, some shocked, some uncomfortable, some pretending to look away because they didn't want to be part of the ugliness happening right in front of them. My cheek throbbed with that sharp, stinging heat you get after a fresh slap, but the real pain wasn't on my skin. It was deeper, somewhere in that place people call pride, that place men work their whole lives to protect. My daughter rushed to me, tears already pooling in her eyes, hands shaking as she grabbed my arm, whispering, "Dad, please, please, let's just go home." But I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at Ethan, who stood there with his chest inflated like he'd won something, like he'd proved some kind of point. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even thinking about what he just did. He was proud of it, and that told me everything I needed to know about the mask he'd been wearing all this time. The mask had cracked, and the real man underneath wasn't someone my daughter should have ever married. But the damage was done, and this wasn't the moment to argue about it. People murmured around us, phones came out, because of course they did, and that humiliation cut deeper than any slap. I was raised in a time when a man's dignity was his backbone, when you stood tall no matter how much life tried to fold you. But right then, surrounded by whispers and shock and judgment, I felt something inside me sink lower than it ever had. Ethan stepped closer, voice dripping with arrogance as he said, "See what I mean? He can't even stand straight. How's he supposed to run a farm?" My daughter whipped her head toward him, pure heartbreak flashing across her face as she whispered, "What's wrong with you?" But he just shrugged like her pain was an inconvenience. And that's when something clicked in me, something sharp and cold. I didn't shout. I didn't swing back. I didn't defend myself. I just took a long, slow breath, stood up straighter, brushed the dust off my clothes, and looked at him with a calmness that surprised even me. Because in that moment, I realized something. Men like him don't want a fight, they want a reaction. They thrive on chaos. But I wasn't giving him that. Not here. Not in front of my daughter. I turned toward the exit, the hall stretching out in front of me like a long tunnel, and every step felt heavy, like I was walking away from the version of myself I tried to become for her sake. People parted as I walked, eyes dropping, like they were witnessing something sacred, maybe the breaking of a man, maybe the awakening of one. And right as I reached the door, I pulled out my phone, stared at the screen for half a second, and made a call I hoped I'd never have to make again. A call to someone from the life I'd buried. A call that meant this night was far from over. The cold night air hit me like a slap of its own, sharp enough to clear the noise still ringing in my ears. I stepped outside the hall, letting the door swing shut behind me, muffling the chaos inside until it became nothing more than a dull hum. The sky was dark, the kind of dark that makes everything feel heavier, like the world is holding its breath. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the kind of anger that crawls up your spine and refuses to settle. I stared at my phone screen for a long second, my thumb hovering over a name I swore I would never touch again. Marcus. A name tied to a past I'd spent years burying under good habits and quiet living. A name that came with memories of backroom deals, late-night calls, fists, threats, and a version of me I promised my daughter she'd never have to see. But tonight had crossed a line I didn't even think existed anymore. I hit call. It rang once. Twice. Then a deep voice answered, calm but edged with curiosity. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again," he said. I swallowed, staring at the gravel under my feet. "I need a favor," I replied, voice steady even though nothing inside me felt steady at all. "Where are you?" he asked, no hesitation, no judgment, like he'd been waiting for this moment. I told him the address. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what happened. All he said was, "Give me 10 minutes." As soon as the call ended, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The air felt colder, the night felt tighter, like everything around me understood the weight of what I'd just done. I leaned against the wall, staring at the glowing windows of the hall, silhouettes moving inside like shadows trapped in someone else's story. Somewhere in there was my daughter, crying, confused, heartbreaking on the same night she was supposed to feel like the world was finally hers. And the fact that I couldn't go back in, not like this, not with the storm in my chest, hurt more than the slap ever could. I kept thinking about Ethan's face, that smug confidence, the way he looked down at me like I was nothing. He had no idea who I used to be. No idea what I'd done to keep my daughter safe. No idea what I'd sacrificed to become a man she could be proud of. But the thing about building a new life is that the old one never disappears, it just sleeps. And when someone pushes too hard, too far, too publicly, it wakes up. Headlights appeared at the end of the road, slowly rolling closer until a familiar black SUV stopped right in front of me. The window rolled down, and Marcus leaned out, his eyes scanning my bruised cheek, his expression shifting from confusion to anger so fast it felt like a gust of wind. "Who did that to you?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just nodded toward the hall. Marcus cracked his knuckles, stepped out of the car, and said, "All right then. Let's go fix this." And with that sentence, I knew there was no turning back. As soon as the door swung shut behind me, the sound of the wedding faded like someone had turned down the volume on my entire life, leaving me with nothing but the cold air hitting my face and the weight of Marcus's footsteps right behind me. I kept walking, slow, steady, like every step was being counted by someone I couldn't see, someone waiting to judge whether I'd earned the right to take another one. The parking lot was mostly empty, just rows of cars catching the glow of the streetlights, but it felt like a stadium full of ghosts watching me, ghosts I'd spent years outrunning. I could feel my daughter's eyes burning into my back from inside the venue, that mix of confusion, anger, and fear that only a kid forced to grow up too fast knows how to feel. And yeah, I wanted to turn around, I wanted to storm back in and tell everyone to mind their damn business, but the truth was, I knew this moment was coming. You don't escape a past like mine by wishing it away. It comes back, patient as hell, knocking at your door on the one day you think you're finally safe. Marcus cleared his throat, slow and heavy, the way he always did when he wasn't sure if he should talk or stay quiet, and for a second it almost made me laugh. This big, dangerous man suddenly acting like he didn't want to disturb the peace. What peace? The only peace I ever had was pretend, and I guess today was the day the pretend finally broke. We reached his car, that same black SUV I'd hoped I'd never see again, and he opened the back door for me, not rough, not threatening, just inevitable, like he knew I'd get in no matter how much I hated it. I took one last breath of the warm air drifting from the banquet hall, full of food and music and people who thought life could be simple, and I let it go. I slid into the back seat, the leather cold against my skin, and as the door shut, the world outside became nothing but muffled light and blurry shapes. Marcus got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out slow, like even he respected how big of a moment this was for me. I didn't ask where we were going. He didn't offer to tell me. Because deep down, we both knew the truth. Once you step back into the shadows you escaped, you don't get to choose the direction. You just brace for the ride and pray it doesn't break you this time. The road stretched out in front of us like one long warning sign, empty, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like something's waiting just past the headlights. And I sat there in the back seat trying to keep my mind from spiraling into every worst-case scenario I'd buried years ago. Marcus kept one hand on the wheel, the other tapping lightly against his thigh the way he always did when he was thinking too hard, and even though he hadn't said a damn thing since we pulled out of the lot, the air between us was loud as hell with all the things we weren't saying. I watched the city fade behind us, the lights turning smaller, the sounds turning softer, and for a second, it almost felt like I was being driven out of my own life, like I was some passenger in a story that used to be mine. I leaned my head back, eyes half closed, trying to figure out where everything went so sideways, wondering how I went from giving my daughter away at her wedding to being dragged back into a world that only knows how to take from you. The car hit a bump, not big, but enough to snap me out of my thoughts, and when I opened my eyes, I caught Marcus watching me in the rearview mirror. Not angry. Not smug. Just that heavy, tired look people get when they've run out of ways to say, "I'm sorry," without actually saying it. "You good?" he asked, voice low, like he knew the answer already and still asked just to give me the dignity of pretending I had control. I didn't answer. Not because I was being dramatic, but because I genuinely didn't know. How do you measure good when your whole world changed in 20 minutes? So instead, I looked out the window and watched the reflections slide across the glass like shadows chasing each other, and all I could think was how messed up it was that I had finally built something clean, something almost peaceful, and now here I was, getting dragged backward like the universe had decided I owed it one more hit. The farther we drove, the colder the air felt, and the more I realized this wasn't some quick talk or a favor being called in. This was something bigger, deeper, heavier, the kind of thing that makes your stomach drop before you even know the details. And as the car picked up speed, humming steady beneath me, I felt it in my bones. Whatever waited for me at the end of this ride was going to change everything. And there was no version of this story where I walked away untouched. The farther we got from the city, the more the silence in that car felt like its own living thing, crawling up the back of my neck, squeezing around my ribs like it wanted to remind me I wasn't in control anymore, and every mile we put behind us just made that truth settle deeper. Marcus finally turned off the main highway onto this narrow back road, the kind of road people only use when they don't want to be seen, and instantly my chest tightened because I knew this wasn't some casual "we need to talk" situation. This was planned, intentional, and dangerous in a way I could feel before I could even name it. My daughter's voice kept replaying in my head, the way she'd laughed just hours earlier, the way she'd hugged me like I'd always be there, like I'd always stay one step ahead of the shadows I used to run from. And guilt hit me like a sucker punch because if anything happened now, she'd never know how hard I fought to stay clean for her. The trees outside blurred together, dark and tall, bending over the road like they were trying to listen in, and I caught myself counting the turns Marcus took, the landmarks we passed, the distance between each sign, old habits kicking in like muscle memory. Because when you've lived through certain things, you never really stop mapping exits. I leaned forward slightly, trying to read Marcus's face from the side, but he kept that same tight jaw, that same straight stare like he was driving through the past instead of the night. "You're not telling me something," I said finally, my voice rough from holding too many questions back. He didn't react at first, didn't even blink, which somehow made my stomach drop even harder. Then he let out this slow breath, like he'd been wrestling with the truth and finally gave up, and said, "I'm trying to figure out how to say it without you jumping out of the damn car." My heart knocked against my ribs, once, hard, and then again like it was warning me to brace for impact. "Just spit it out," I told him, even though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. The tires crunched over loose gravel as we pulled into this barely paved stretch, nothing around us but darkness and open land, and for a second I swore the air itself felt heavier, like the night was leaning in to eavesdrop. Marcus slowed the car to a crawl, hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles went white, and when he finally glanced back at me through the mirror, there was no hesitation, no softening. It was the look of a man about to drop something that couldn't be taken back. "They found him," he said. 2 words. Just 2. But they hit me so hard everything inside me stopped moving, because there was only one person, him, could ever mean, the one ghost I prayed I'd never see rise again, and hearing that name, unsaid but loud as hell, pulled the floor right out from under me. For a long second I couldn't even breathe, like the name Marcus didn't say out loud had already filled the whole damn car with its own gravity, dragging everything in me down to the place I'd spent years trying to bury, and it took every bit of willpower I had not to rip the door open and run into the dark just to escape the weight of it. My voice cracked when I finally managed to speak, this low, shaky whisper that didn't even sound like me anymore. "You're lying." Marcus didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't give me even a sliver of space to pretend this was some messed up joke. He kept his eyes locked on the road ahead, jaw tight like he was bracing for backlash he already knew was coming. "I wish I was," he said, and the way he said it, flat, steady, defeated, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a rumor, this wasn't a maybe, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was real. This was happening. And the man I'd hoped was gone for good, wasn't. My pulse started racing, not fast but heavy, every beat thudding through my chest and echoing in my ears like someone knocking from the inside trying to get out, because I'd built my whole life on the belief that I was done with that world, done with that man, done with the violence and debts and consequences that came attached to him like rust on metal. "How long?" I asked, staring out the window at the endless stretch of empty land rolling past us, wishing I could disappear into it. Marcus hesitated, and that hesitation alone told me I wasn't going to like the answer. "Long enough," he muttered. "Long enough for word to spread. Long enough for him to start asking questions. Long enough for him to know you're clean now, and exactly where you are." My stomach flipped so hard I had to close my eyes, gripping the seat like the earth itself had shifted under the wheels. Images flashed through my mind, old deals, old mistakes, old threats spoken too close to my face, promises made in dark rooms with no windows and no exits. "I'm done with him," I said quietly, almost begging myself to believe it. Marcus shook his head slowly. "Yeah," he replied, voice heavy. "But he sure as hell ain't done with you." The road curved, moonlight cutting through the trees in thin white slashes, and for a moment the whole world outside looked like it was holding its breath, waiting for whatever came next. I swallowed hard, feeling something cold settle into my chest, deeper than fear, something like inevitability. "What does he want?" I asked finally, though I already knew the answer before the words even left my mouth. Marcus pressed his lips together, exhaled sharply through his nose, and said, "He wants what he thinks you still owe." Marcus didn't say a word as we walked down the long concrete walkway behind the hall, but I could feel the tension rolling off him like heat from an engine left running too long. The night air was cold enough to sting, yet sweat still gathered at the back of my neck. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was shame, or maybe it was the way the world can flip in a single moment, and leave you standing there trying to remember how to breathe. We reached his truck, a beat-up black Ford that rumbled even when it wasn't turned on, and Marcus opened the passenger door for me like he already knew I was too shaken to do it myself. "Get in," he said quietly, not demanding, just steady, like a man who'd already decided he was going to carry the weight for both of us. I slid in, my hands trembling against my knees, and for a second I caught my reflection in the side mirror, and damn, I barely recognized the man staring back. My cheeks were still red from the slap, but it wasn't the physical sting that hurt. It was the memory of 200 people watching me fall and the silence that followed, the kind of silence that rattles your bones. Marcus climbed in, shut the door, and the truck felt too small for both of our breathing. He didn't start the engine yet. He just looked at me. "You good?" he asked. A stupid question, maybe, but a necessary one. I nodded even though I wasn't. "What now?" I whispered, sounding like someone half my age. Marcus leaned back, arms folded over the steering wheel, thinking in that slow, calculating way he always had. "You called me," he finally said. "So I'm gonna ask you one thing, and you better answer it honestly." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Okay. Do you want your dignity back?" he asked. "Or do you want revenge?" The words hit me like another slap, but not the humiliating kind, more like someone shaking you awake after you've been asleep too long. I stared at the dashboard, at the way the dim lights from the hall flickered across it, and I realized I'd never actually separated those two things in my mind. I just want my life back," I said. "Then we're doing this my way," Marcus replied, finally turning the key. The engine woke with a growl that felt too loud for the quiet night. "Buckle up, old man. Tonight's not about fighting back. It's about taking back what's yours." The truck rolled forward, pulling us away from the glowing hall, away from the laughter that wasn't really laughter anymore, away from the version of my life that ended the moment my son-in-law's hand struck my face. And as we hit the dark road leading out of town, I realized I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I was afraid of what I would become by the time this night was over. Marcus drove fast enough to make the trees smear into dark shapes, but not fast enough to make it look suspicious. He'd always been like that, calculated, controlled, the kind of guy who could walk into chaos and somehow make it behave. I sat there gripping the door handle like the night itself was trying to shake me loose. My mind kept replaying the moment over and over, the slap, the fall, the gasps, the way Ethan looked down at me like I was nothing. Every time the image flashed, my jaw tightened until it hurt. Marcus noticed. "Don't go there," he said, eyes fixed on the road. "Not yet." "How do I not?" I asked, voice cracking. "He humiliated me in front of everybody I know." Marcus sighed, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "Yeah, and we'll deal with that. But if you let your emotions steer the wheel tonight, you're gonna crash before we even get started." The truck's heater blew warm air across the windshield, fogging it slightly before clearing again, like the night was breathing with us. "So what's the plan?" I finally asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled the truck onto an old dirt road, a road I hadn't driven on in years. The kind of road that didn't show up on GPS, the kind folks used only when they didn't want to be seen. My stomach twisted. "Why are we here?" "Because," he said, leaning forward to look through the darkness, "you've been letting that man step all over your life for too long without even realizing it. And before we deal with him, we deal with you." I frowned. "What does that even mean?" Marcus put the truck in park and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was so thick it almost hummed. "Get out," he said. I hesitated. "Marcus, get out," he repeated, but not in a harsh way. More like a coach pushing a player into a moment they desperately need. I stepped outside, boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt. The cold hit instantly, sharp as a blade. The moon hung low, lighting up the stretch of empty land where my father used to bring me when I was a kid. Back when life was simple. Back when strength meant something different. Marcus walked around the truck and stood in front of me. "You think tonight started at the wedding?" he asked. "It didn't. Tonight started the day you let people believe you were weak." I shook my head. I'm not, you are, he cut in. But that's not the problem. The problem is you believe you're weak. And Ethan? That man smelled it. People like him always do. I felt those words settle deep in my chest, heavy, uncomfortable, real. So what now? Marcus took a slow breath, watching me carefully. No, he said. I need you to tell me the truth. Not the version you tell your daughter. Not the version you tell the world. The real truth. About what? About why you called me tonight instead of walking back in there and defending yourself. The question hit like a punch, quiet, precise, right where it hurt. I opened my mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, because hiding from the truth wasn't an option anymore. Because, I whispered, part of me felt like maybe I deserved it. Marcus nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting that answer. Good, he said. Now we can finally start. And in that cold, silent darkness, I realized this night wasn't just about Ethan. It was about the part of me I'd been avoiding for years. The part that was finally done being silent. Marcus didn't move right away after I gave him the truth. He just stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, staring at me like he was measuring the weight of the man in front of him. The night felt colder than before, the kind of cold that settles in your bones and makes every breath feel heavier. You know what your problem is? He finally said, voice steady but sharp. You think dignity is something people hand you. Like a certificate. Like a trophy. But dignity isn't given, man, it's claimed. I didn't respond, mostly because I didn't trust my voice not to crack. The truth he'd pulled out of me was still burning like a fresh wound. Marcus stepped closer. I watched you for years. You handled storms that would have broken most people. You buried your wife, raised a daughter alone, worked land that tried to kill you every season. And you did it without complaining. But somewhere along the way, you started believing pain made you smaller instead of stronger. I swallowed hard, feeling that hit deeper than any slap ever could. So what do you want me to do tonight? I asked. Marcus exhaled, his breath turning into a pale cloud in the air. First, accept something you've been avoiding. He pointed at my chest. Ethan didn't break you tonight. He exposed a crack that's been there for years. I felt my jaw clench, but this time it wasn't anger, it was recognition. And second? Second, he said, you take back the land he tried to steal right out from under you. My eyebrows pulled together. How? Marcus smirked, the kind of smirk that always meant trouble but also meant he had a plan that would work. By reminding him that the man he slapped tonight isn't the man he's gonna face tomorrow. I shook my head slightly. He's got money, Marcus. Lawyers. Influence. He thinks he's untouchable. Marcus chuckled, low and humorless. Everybody thinks they're untouchable until the ground shakes under their feet. He reached into the truck and grabbed a small metal toolbox, the same one we used back in the day when we were 20 and stupid and thought life was something we could outrun. He set it on the hood and opened it. Inside were things that didn't belong together: old papers, keys, envelopes, a flash drive, a folded map, a few items that looked harmless but weren't. What's all this? I asked. Marcus tapped the map. This is your land. The real borders. The ones your father drew by hand before the county redrew them to squeeze more taxes out of you. Then he tapped the flash drive. And this is everything Ethan's been hiding from your daughter. His debts. His gambling losses. The loan sharks he's been lying about. My heart dropped. How do you have all this? Marcus's expression darkened. Because he didn't just try to steal your farm. He tried to drag your daughter into a mess that could ruin her life. And I don't let people mess with family. My chest tightened, anger slowly replacing the shame I'd been drowning in all night. Marcus closed the toolbox with a soft click. You ready to stop surviving and start fighting? I stared at the box, at the weight of the night, at the man who'd come the moment I called, and something inside me shifted, quietly, but powerfully. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. Marcus nodded once. Good. Because tonight, we're not running from anything. We're walking straight into the fire. Marcus handed me the toolbox like it was some kind of truth I'd avoided touching for years, and the cold metal felt heavier than it should have, like the weight wasn't from what was inside but from everything it represented. The wind picked up, brushing against the trees and making them rustle like whispers in the dark, and for a second it felt like the whole night was listening. "Open it," Marcus said. I hesitated, not because I was scared of what I'd find, but because opening it meant accepting the version of reality I'd spent months ignoring. Still, I flipped the latches and lifted the lid. The papers were old, yellowed edges, creases from being folded too many times. But the map looked like it had been drawn yesterday, the ink still bold, the lines sharp. "Your dad knew the county was gonna cheat him," Marcus said, stepping closer. "So he mapped out every inch of that land himself. Every fence post. Every tree he planted. He left this for you." My throat tightened. "He never told me. He didn't think he needed to," Marcus said. "He thought you'd never let anyone take advantage of you." That line hit like a gut punch because all I could think about was Ethan's hand across my face, the laughter that wasn't really laughter, the feeling of hitting the floor in front of people who'd known me my whole life. I looked down at the flash drive next. "And this?" Marcus's jaw flexed. "Proof your son-in-law is drowning in debt. He's been using your daughter's bank account as leverage. And that farm? He wanted it because he needed collateral for a loan he shouldn't have taken." A cold wave rolled through me, not fear, not even anger, but something darker, something that made my hands shake and my chest tighten. "She doesn't know any of this," I said, barely above a whisper. "No," Marcus replied. "Because he made sure she stayed blinded by love and wedding plans while he dug himself into a hole." I closed the box slowly, my fingertips pressing into the lid as if holding it down would somehow hold down the fury spreading through me. "So what's the move?" Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "We go to the farm tonight. The back office. Your father kept the real deeds hidden behind the old wall panel. If they're still there, you'll have everything you need to shut Ethan down before he even knows what hit him." For the first time that night, something inside me sparked, small, faint, but real. "And if they're not?" Marcus shrugged. "Then we improvise. You called me, remember? I've got plans stacked on plans." The wind swept across the field again, colder this time, almost warning. I looked toward the distant outline of the farm. My father's land, my daughter's inheritance, the place where half my life had been built and the other half buried. "You think he'll try something tonight?" I asked. Marcus didn't hesitate. "He already has. He sent those 2 guys to intimidate you. That wasn't a warning, that was step 1. I felt my stomach drop. "Step 1 toward what?" Marcus met my eyes, steady and unshaken. "Toward making sure you lose everything." A long silence wrapped around us, thick and heavy. The kind of silence that forces you to choose, run or fight. I straightened my shoulders, even though they felt weighed down by a lifetime of disappointments. "Then we don't waste another second," I said. "Let's go." Marcus cracked the faintest smile. "There he is," he muttered. We climbed back into the truck, the toolbox between us like a loaded truth, and as Marcus started the engine, I realized something I hadn't felt since the slap, something sharp, steady, unfamiliar. Not anger. Not fear. Control. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Then Detective Morris stepped forward, placing one hand on the table. "Listen," he said quietly. "If what you're telling me is true, then someone inside our department is involved." My stomach tightened. "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied. "Someone warned them. Someone is protecting that warehouse." He exchanged a tense look with his partner, like they had suddenly stepped into something far bigger than they expected. "We'll need proof," his partner said, leaning in. "Not guesses. Not assumptions. Something concrete." I opened my backpack and slid the small USB across the table, the same one my brother had hidden in the basement. "This," I said, "is everything. Their payments, their communication logs, the drop-off schedules, even the names. Detective Morris hesitated before picking it up, as if touching it made the situation real. He turned it in his hand, whispering almost to himself. If this is legit, people could lose their badges, or worse. I leaned back in my chair. They already tried to kill me for it, I said. So yeah? Worse. The partner straightened up. All right, he said. We'll verify it. But from this moment on, you do not move alone. You stay close. You stay quiet. And you follow everything we tell you. I nodded. I didn't have much choice left anyway. But deep inside, something felt wrong. Because the whole time we were talking, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was listening. We walked out of the small interview room, but the hall outside felt colder, quieter, almost too quiet. Detective Morris guided me toward a side exit, supposedly to avoid attention, but even he kept glancing over his shoulder like something had shifted. As we reached the door, his partner's phone buzzed. He checked the screen. His face changed instantly. Don't go outside, he said sharply. Morris froze. Why? What happened? The partner lowered his voice, but I still heard it. There's a black SUV parked across the street. Same plates from the warehouse surveillance. They followed him here. My heart dropped. So they knew. They knew I had talked. They knew where I was. Morris grabbed my arm. We're going out the back. Now. We moved fast through a narrow hallway lined with old filing cabinets. I could hear my own breathing getting louder, faster, heavier. Every step echoed like we were announcing our position to the whole world. We reached another exit, an old metal door with peeling paint. Morris pushed it open just a crack and looked outside. Clear, he whispered. Go. We slipped into the alley behind the station. The air was damp, the sky dimming as evening crept in. It should have been quiet, but I swear I heard footsteps somewhere behind us. Not close. But close enough. Hurry, Morris said. Car is around the corner. We hadn't taken more than 10 steps when a deep voice echoed from the far end of the alley. Going somewhere? We all stopped. A tall shadow stepped forward, blocking the exit. And I recognized his silhouette instantly. The man from the warehouse. The one who chased me before. He had found me again. Morris instantly shoved me behind him, his hand lifting just enough for me to see he was reaching for his gun. His partner stepped sideways, trying to create an angle, but the alley was too tight, too boxed in, and the man blocking the exit knew it. He walked toward us slow, calm, confident, like he already owned the moment. The dim light caught the scar across his cheek, that same one I saw under the warehouse lamp, and it sent a cold jolt through my chest. You should have stayed quiet, he said, voice low and steady. Would have been easier for everyone. Morris took a small step forward. This is your only warning, turn around and leave. Now. The man actually laughed, like Morris had told a joke he'd heard before. You think I'm here alone? He said. Right then, a car door slammed from somewhere behind us. Another figure. Another set of footsteps. We were being boxed in. Morris' partner whispered, We need backup. He reached for his radio. Before he could speak, a muffled pop snapped through the alley. The radio flew out of his hand, shattered on the concrete. A suppressed shot. They weren't just threatening us. They were ready to end it. Move! Morris shouted. He grabbed my arm and yanked me toward a stack of old dumpsters pushed against the wall. We squeezed behind them, metal scraping my shoulders, just as another suppressed shot pinged off the dumpster's side. I dropped down, breathing hard, dust filling my nose and throat. My ears rang even though the gunshots were quiet. Morris crouched beside me, jaw clenched, whispering fast. They're trying to trap us, not kill us yet. Stay low. Don't run unless I say. The footsteps grew louder, 3, maybe 4 guys now. They were spreading out, boots crunching gravel, voices low but getting closer. Then one voice, his voice, said the words that froze me completely. Find the kid. We need him alive. My stomach dropped. They weren't here for the cops. They were here for me. Morris' eyes snapped toward mine the second those words echoed through the alley, and for the first time since I met him, I saw something raw in his face. Not anger, not frustration, fear. Not for himself. For me. He pressed his back against the dumpster, leaning in close so they wouldn't hear us, and whispered. Listen carefully. They won't shoot you outright. They need you. That buys us time. His voice was steady, but his hand was shaking just enough to make my chest tighten. Behind him, his partner was trying to slow his breathing, blood dripping from a small cut on his palm from the broken radio. The footsteps split, 2 coming from the right, 1 from the left, and the original man walking straight down the middle like he was taking a stroll. My heart thumped so loud I was sure they could hear it. I felt every beat in my throat, my ears, my ribs. The alley seemed to shrink around us, the air getting thinner with every step they took toward our hiding spot. Morris leaned forward just enough to peek around the dumpster's edge before jerking back. They're close, he whispered. If one of them looks behind these cans, they'll see us. The man with the scar spoke again, voice calm as ever. You know he's in here somewhere. He's not stupid enough to run. Not after what he saw. Not after what I saw. Those words hit like a punch in the ribs. I swallowed so hard it hurt. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now, my palms slick with sweat. Morris put a steadying hand on my shoulder, grounding me, keeping me from spiraling. Then he whispered, When I move, you run left. Don't stop. Don't turn around. I'll cover you. I shook my head instantly. There was no way I was leaving him. But he squeezed my shoulder harder. If they get you, it's over. You understand? Over. Their shadows stretched across the alley floor, long and distorted under the flickering streetlight. The footsteps were right beside the dumpsters now, one man stopping so close I could see the outline of his boot through the narrow gap between the trash bins. I held my breath. Morris held his gun tight. His partner mouthed, 3, 2. Everything felt like it was hanging by a single thread. Then the scarred man said, almost amused, Check behind the dumpsters. The boot shifted. Someone reached for the metal handle. Morris whispered one word, barely a breath, but enough to snap everything loose. Run, you said. The second that word left Morris' mouth, he exploded out from behind the dumpster, slamming his shoulder into the nearest man so hard the guy's gun went skidding across the pavement. I felt the rush of air as Morris shoved me sideways, forcing my feet to move even before my brain could catch up. I sprinted left, my shoes slipping on the wet concrete as shouts erupted behind me. A gunshot cracked through the alley, loud enough to rattle the air, but I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned instantly, my throat tightening as the cold night air cut through me like glass. Behind me, I heard Morris yelling something, but it was drowned out by the chaos. Another gunshot, someone cursing, the echo of bodies slamming into metal trash cans. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to help him, but some instinct older than reason kept pushing my legs forward. My chest felt like it would tear open, but I kept running, weaving between the shadows, trying not to slip on the uneven pavement. Every sound felt sharper, louder, the slap of boots behind me, the metallic rattle of chain-link fencing, the heavy breathing of someone gaining on me. Up ahead, the alley split, left toward the main street, right toward another narrow passageway. I didn't know which one was safer. I didn't know anything anymore. I picked right, mostly because it was darker. Maybe they'd miss me if I blended into the shadows. Maybe they wouldn't. My heartbeat roared in my ears like a drumline as I sprinted down the narrower path, my hand brushing the brick wall to steady myself. The whole alley smelled like oil and damp cardboard, but underneath that, I could swear I smelled something else, smoke. Behind me, one of the men shouted, He's in the side alley. Don't let him get out of here. My stomach dropped. They were closer than I thought. I pushed harder, feeling my legs scream in protest. A dead end suddenly loomed in front of me, a tall metal gate with a rusty lock and no way around. panic surged through me so fast I almost collapsed. I grabbed the bars and shook them, praying the lock was weak. It didn't budge. Footsteps thundered behind me, growing louder, faster. I was trapped. Completely trapped. My breath came in sharp, panicked gasps as I backed away from the gate, trying to think, trying to find anything that could save me. The only light came from a broken lamp flickering overhead, casting wildly shifting shadows across the walls. The footsteps slowed, like the men wanted me to hear exactly how close they were. Like they wanted me to feel it. Then the scarred man's voice drifted into the alley, calm and cold as ice. "Nowhere left to run, kid." I pressed myself against the gate, every muscle locked, every nerve screaming. His shadow stretched toward me as he stepped into view. And then, just as he raised his hand, a loud crash erupted behind them. A voice shouted my name. Someone else was coming. But whether they were there to save me, or finish what the others started, I had no idea. The crash behind the men was so loud it shook the whole alley, like someone had thrown a car engine straight into a stack of metal. All three of the guys spun around, guns lifted, their silhouettes twisting under the flickering alley light. For a second I couldn't breathe. I didn't know whether I should run, drop to the ground, or just accept whatever was coming. Then, through the haze of dust and the echoing clang of falling metal, a figure stepped forward, slow, limping, but steady enough to make every man in that alley freeze. It was Marcus. His shirt was torn, one side of his face bruised, blood dripping down from his eyebrow, but his eyes, those sharp, steady eyes, burned with a kind of fury I'd never seen before. "You touch him," he growled, pointing directly at the scarred man, "and I swear to God I'll bury every last one of you right here." The scarred man laughed, but it was tight, nervous. He hadn't expected Marcus to still be standing. "You really think you can take all of us?" he snarled. Marcus cracked his neck, rolled his shoulders like he was about to step into a boxing ring, and said, "Who said I'm alone?" And before I could even process it, two shadows moved behind him, two men I didn't recognize, both big, both serious, both carrying the kind of confidence that didn't need guns to prove a point. The men behind the scarred guy shifted, suddenly uneasy. The alley felt smaller, tighter, like the air itself was waiting to see who'd make the first move. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might burst through my ribs. Part of me was grateful Marcus had come. The other part was terrified his arrival was about to get all of us killed. The scarred man's jaw tightened as he looked at Marcus, then at the gate behind me, then finally at the two men flanking him. "This isn't over," he said, shrugging like he was doing us a favor by backing down. "He owes us. And we always collect." Marcus stepped forward, fists clenched, and for a split second I honestly believed he was going to swing. But the scarred man lifted his hand, signaling his crew to back off. They stepped away slowly, their boots scraping the pavement as they disappeared into the mouth of the alley, never taking their eyes off us. The moment they were gone, my legs nearly gave out. Marcus rushed to me, grabbing my shoulders, checking my face like I was a kid who just wandered into traffic. "You all right?" he said, breathless. I nodded, but it wasn't true. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. Marcus glanced down the alley again, jaw tight. "We gotta move," he said. "Now. Before they circle back." And as he helped me away from the dead end, one thing became painfully clear. Whatever this was, whatever my daughter's husband had dragged me into, it was far from finished. The night felt heavier as we made our way out of the alley, every shadow stretching long and thin across the pavement like it wanted to grab our ankles and pull us back into the darkness we just escaped. Marcus kept one hand on my arm, steadying me, while the two men who'd come with him stayed a few steps behind us, watching every corner, every rooftop, every moving silhouette like they expected someone to jump out at any second. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely keep pace, but adrenaline kept pushing me forward, kept my mind alert even as my chest burned from fear and exhaustion. We crossed into a wider street where the streetlights glowed a soft orange, giving everything a strange, almost surreal warmth, like the world outside the alley didn't even know how close we'd come to dying. Marcus guided me toward an old sedan parked crooked along the curb, the back bumper dented, the windows tinted dark enough to hide the faces inside. When he opened the back door and motioned for me to get in, I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because I felt something inside me breaking open, a realization hitting me harder than the slap Ethan had given me on the wedding night. This wasn't random. None of it. Those men weren't just thugs hired to scare me. They were connected to something bigger, something Ethan had willingly stepped into. Something he expected me to surrender my entire life to. As Marcus slid into the driver's seat and the engine rumbled awake, I stared out the window, watching the alley disappear behind us, swallowed by darkness. "You need to hear the truth now," Marcus said, his voice low, like he'd been holding this sentence in for years. "Ethan isn't who you think he is. He's tied up with people who don't just take things, they own people, farms, land, whole families. He sold your name to them months ago, told them you'd hand over the property without a fight." My stomach twisted, my hands balling into fists on my knees. I thought of my daughter, her smile, her innocence, the way she looked at Ethan as if he were her entire future. "Why would he do that?" I whispered, barely able to speak. Marcus exchanged a glance with the man beside him, then looked at me through the rearview mirror. "Because he's in deep debt. And your farm? It's worth more than you realize. They don't just want land. They want control." I leaned back, feeling the weight of everything collapsing on my shoulders. The humiliation at the wedding, the alley chase, the look in Ethan's eyes when he slapped me. It all made sense now, as twisted as it was. The car turned down a quieter road, where houses sat dark and still, and for a moment the only sound was the steady hum of the engine. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice cracking. Marcus sighed, gripping the wheel tighter. "You fight back. But you don't fight alone." The words hung in the air like a promise, one I wasn't sure I was ready for, but one I desperately needed. As the car carried us farther into the night, I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a war I never asked for, but one I was finally ready to face.